Welcome to the WP SEO Show, brought to you by SEO Hive, your proactive white label SEO partner. The WP SEO Show is all about talking WordPress and SEO, from optimizations, structures, setups, and plugins. We explore how to make your WordPress website perform better in the search engines. Here are your hosts, Pete Everett and Jeff Patch.
Hello and welcome to the WP SEO Show. I am your co-host Jeff, here with my co-host Pete. We're not going to talk about using the word co-host too many times in the sentence today. How's it going, Pete?
I'm all good, thanks, mate. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You know, we keep talking about like how much we're enjoying this and stuff, but I still feel so dumb saying some things when we get started. I'm not going to lie. Like, it just feels so awkward for the first like 30 seconds and whatever. Who cares?
Yeah, and if you don't know what we're talking about, go and listen to the first 3 minutes of last week's show, because we really went into this.
I'm not going to name it, but there used to be a very large podcast that I listened to all the time, and the intro would sometimes be like 15 minutes long, because then they had like commercials and messages from our sponsors. None of it was like, you know, produced. It was just them talking, and that's cool. But like, I just made a habit to skip 15 minutes to every podcast every time I started that. And I'm saying that hoping that people aren't doing that for us. I really hope they aren't.
Well, yeah, I'd hope not. But, you know, I realize, I mean, we do have an ad roll that runs at the start of every episode. We can't deny it.
I mean, fair point. But we're not, selling vitamins or something. You know what I mean? We're selling WordPress SEO services. I mean, who doesn't want to listen to that?
Well, and you know what? If you'll be able to tell if that ad's not working, because we'll switch it for an ad to sell vitamins.
Yeah, that's true. In the future.
Yeah. Here's a gauge on how well our business is going. Check out the ads at the start and end of our podcast.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something if we're doing a show about SEO and WordPress and our ads are just nothing? I hear that sometimes too. You listen to something and you're like, lawn services? Okay, all right. I don't know how that affects my whatever.
Well, so we host the show on Captivate FM, and I actually know the guy that founded Captivate. He lives in Sheffield, where I live.
Oh,
and
really?
Yeah, he does. And I've met him a couple of times. And well, the fact that I know him is completely irrelevant to what I'm going to say. That was just a name drop. So, Mark, if you're listening, I now want an increase in my commission, please. But
no, you just get the cool points for name dropping them. That's all you get today.
But they recently, it was probably about 7 or 8 months ago, changed the ad rolls. So basically, you can now subscribe to like affiliate ad platforms through the host.
So they just kind of inject them in there for you.
Yeah, so exactly like YouTube ads work, where they know where there's peak listens almost, or where there's peak breaks to put an ad in. It will just insert an ad into your podcast, and there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either just let it be automatic and the ad just appears wherever the ad appears, or you can put markers in the show when we upload it to say, right, well, at these timestamps, that would be an appropriate point to put ads. And I think you can put 4 in. I might be wrong with that, but you can put a number of them in. And but yeah, I as much as I love Mark, as much as I love Captivate FM, I will not be putting those automated ads, because you literally have no control over, and yeah, let's talk about something from SEO and then have an ad about erectile dysfunction appear in the middle of it. It just doesn't, it's just not going to happen. Right.
I mean, I see the reasoning there. I haven't used this, so I don't know, but I'm gonna hope that they might get some sort of like criteria, some like, categorization on that you can implement, or some sort of algorithm thing. Because I mean, you theoretically could have that same thing doing like Google AdSense or YouTube or whatever, but they've had the time to work on algorithms and logging all of your data through every activity online and all that stuff. So which is always a weird topic, but like I think is generally a good thing, because I'd rather see ads that are in my interest than mail whatever.
The not.
Yeah, the not.
No, there may be more to it than that. I honestly can't say I've looked into it. I just it came to mind as a feature. Anyway, let's maybe move on from
we digress.
Does this now mean I have to mark this podcast as only suitable for adults?
Mm, I don't know. I don't
No.
know.
Anyway,
But
can
hey,
you bring us
anyway.
back on track? What are we talking about
Yeah,
today?
back on track. Well, a little bit before that, though, I just want to say thanks for everybody who is subscribing into your podcast player of choice, excuse me, and has subscribed and or liked us on YouTube. Appreciate it very much. If you are watching on YouTube today, you will see that Pete and I decided to dress the same. I just realized. So we are very matchy today. And these are very bold color choices, but yeah, we just I had to inject that before we moved on to the real meat of the conversation today.
The bromance is real. What can I say?
You were talking, I'm going, hey, that's what I'm wearing today. I'm wearing orange and gray too. That's weird.
Hey, look, I haven't gone for the Mike Muff, the orange Mike Muff yet. You're even on brand there.
Oh yeah, I do have that. That's pretty cool. That's pretty on brand. I showed up to the random story. I showed up to the golf course once wearing this, and I have a golf bag that matches, and just unrelated, just happens to be these two colors. My dad and his friends made fun of me so much for being that matchy guy on the golf course. And I was just like, it is 35 degrees out here. You're not going to make fun of me for wearing a hoodie. Okay. Be quiet. Like,
So, right, now we've done that. Jeff, bring us back on track. What are we talking about today?
Jeff's ADHD story of the podcast. Hey. Well, today, we've kind of glossed over it. We've mentioned it. We hint about it. We rant about it. But I want to talk about core web vitals today. Maybe talking a little bit more of the specifics, because these are things that, we were talking before. Even a lot of them, sometimes the acronyms just go over my head. I know exactly what they are, but I start looking at them on a report, and you're like, oh my goodness, where do we even start? So yeah, I just thought we would talk about that, and we would see if we can maybe put some suggestions to make improvements in your guys' processes in place and things like that.
Cool. So, first of all, I guess we should sort of start by just outlining why core web vitals exist and what's the point in them. And if you haven't heard of them before, essentially they're like 6 metrics that Google uses to score a website from a user experience point of view, but using quantifiable data. I think that's probably the best way of explaining what they are or what their purpose is. So
it's a great way to explain it.
Well, thank you. It's kind of like trying to put a number on something that ordinarily wouldn't have a number on it, and creating a score out of it. And there's 6 of them. So if we very quickly, I do have them jotted down because I know that when we're recording, I'll forget one of them. So we have first, contentful paint. So that is how long it takes the first item to load, the first major asset to load. That's not time to first byte, which would be the first byte of information that's received by the browser, but the first big asset. So either image or video or whatever it might be, whatever's a substantial asset. Normally, it isn't to do with text and like HTML and that kind of stuff. But how long does it take for that thing to start loading? You also have something called largest contentful paint, which is how long it takes the biggest asset to load. So whatever the biggest thing is, how long does that take? And they're both, well, all of these are timed in time. Funny enough, the value is time.
The real on the largest contentful paint. See, I can't even say it as soon as we start saying it.
We could call it LCP and FCP, but which is how most people do it. But yeah, that doesn't. We can't dive straight into acronyms on a podcast, unfortunately.
that is the one that I guarantee everybody listening to this show has seen fail. If you have a client with a slider plugin on their website.
Oh yeah. Let's not go into naming and shaming Rev Slider on the show, shall we?
Well, most of them, 9 out of 10 of them, but still, I'm using that more as a visual thing. You can just think, it takes up the whole page at the top. That's the largest thing on the page. And if it takes the longest, you're getting penalized if it takes a long time to load.
And actually, you're touching on a good point here, because even though we've only mentioned what 2 of them are, the vast majority of these are stuff you can see. It's quite obvious. When you understand that the 6 of these things that Google's using to measure experience, and these are the 6, I'm going to say at least 4 of them, you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. And then there's one of them that can become the bane of your life, which we'll get onto at the minute. So you've got first contentful paint, largest contentful paint. You then have time to interactive. So that is how long from hitting the enter on the keyboard, hitting that enter stroke, to the page being usable by the user. And ideally, that should be under 2.5 seconds. I don't think you actually get penalized if it's up to 3 seconds, but 2.5 is the number they put on it. You then have something called speed index, which is how quickly the elements of the page are visibly being populated. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's loaded. It is still loading, but actually the user can interact with it. And alongside that, you then have something called cumulative layout shift, or CLS even, which and cumulative layout shift is, you know how if you load a site and you're on a slow connection, or maybe you're on like 1 bar of 4G in the middle of nowhere, and as the page is loading, you can see like the text loads quite quickly, and then as the images load, the text moves around because images are loading in places. So essentially they're pushing the text around. That is cumulative layout shift. Now that's the only one of these that isn't measured in time. It is given a score. I don't know what the scale of the score is, but it's supposed to be under 0.1 somethings. And if it's over 0.1 somethings, then you get then it has recommendations to improve it. And then the final one, which is the one that becomes the bane of our lives, and we'll go through these in a bit more detail, or go through some techniques with some of these in a minute, but is total time blocking. So this is to do with the way that the JavaScript is loading, and that's why it's the bane of your life, because you can't always see it in the background, and particularly if it maybe loads in the header on every page of your website, but if it's not active on that page, you maybe don't even know it's there. So you have to you have to make sure that that the JavaScript isn't blocking itself. Scripts aren't blocking themselves for too long, because that can have, JavaScript obviously interacts with the user with elements that the user can see, so they don't want it to have a negative impact on the user elements, essentially. And that is your 6. Right, I'm done now. The rest of the episode's over to Jeff.
Are your heads exploding yet?
No, if I may just have lost anybody that's listening thinking, oh God, he's just going to list things for the next 35 minutes. So no, there's 6 of them. That's them. There we go.
I'm surprised that you pointed out that the CLS metric isn't a time score. And I guess I've just never noticed that. I've never paid, enough attention to that very specific thing. Whereas obviously we approach CLS and we just get it to pass. Like that's the goal, is make sure it's not failing. But I'm thinking, what is 0.1? I don't know. What does that even mean? How do you quantify that? What does that mean? So, I mean, thankfully the tests say yes or no.
I know. I'll be honest with you that it wasn't until I started the sentence in this podcast that I thought, I don't know what this is 0.1 of. So I just thought I'd be honest and just include that there. So cumulative layout shift is just a number. Total time blocking is in milliseconds, and the other 4 are all in seconds. So that's and they all have their own limits and this and the other, which, as I say, we can get into. But largely speaking, if you have your stack set up correctly and your go live process sorted out, then at least 4 of these items you can kind of bake into your dev process, so you don't really need to worry about them too much. That's not me saying you shouldn't check them, but actually you should be relatively confident that most of them aren't going to affect you. And then there's another couple which you may want to just be aware of to do something about. So where do you want to start? How do you want to broach this from here, Jeff?
Well, I kind of wanted to, you mentioned something funny, not funny, but you mentioned that, if you think about these and you can put them into your process, you can kind of eliminate them even happening, when you launch that site and finding out about it. So that's, the best way to go about it, probably. I think a lot of people launch the site and then run them through a checks and go, uh-oh, we got things to fix. And that's, if you're there, you've got to do it and you should do that check. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to cross these things off before you even get to that stage and never have to go down this path? Absolutely. And that's and not tooting my own horn or tooting our own horn or anything like that. But that's what we've seen this year. And it's that as we've, transitioned away from, how do I put this? But I guess we're doing some builds these days, but we're kind of trying to do builds for clients or agencies that are kind of streamlining their services rather than going through the full traditional, like, here's your design, having a graphic designer build a layout and stuff. And, do you approve this? Okay, now we're going to build your content. Do you approve this? Okay, now we're going to build it. And, oh, it's not like what we designed. I know a lot of people have been in that situation before multiple times. But so as we've done this, rather than, okay, what content do you have? What branding do you have? And then we build a site from that. We launch it, and or before we launch it, we run these tests and we see it's passing everything. And it's kind of like, man, aren't we smart? It's like, well, no, all we really didn't do was break it. Like, these things will work more or less out of the box. So if you launch a site and you're seeing these, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but somebody probably did something that's not ideal. And that could be, like we were talking about, using a slider or something, any major JavaScript, jQuery heavy things, those can, not that you can't improve them by any means, but those are usually ones that cause these things to fail right off the bat, and usually get that, SEO freelancer to let you know there's a bad report on speed test and you've got to fix all this stuff.
Yeah. Now, just before we go into maybe some techniques in a second, there is another thing I kind of want to mention, touching on that point, which is that if you're building your site in WordPress, depending on the tools that you're using, some of the tools may address some of these issues. And therefore, you've got to be quite careful that if you're putting solutions in place, that you're not doubling up, like you're not having two things trying to fix the same thing, because that can essentially affect the load time. If you've got what's jumping out at me, for example, is I know that some of the builders, the thing I mentioned about cumulative layout shift, assets moving around the page, a number of the page builders actually set the dimensions of the image placeholders in the source code, so that even if the image doesn't load, if it's either just delayed or if you've lazy loaded it, the text is already in the place it should be, as if the image was in situ, right? So if your theme does that, or your page builder does that, and then you go and get another plugin in something like Perf Matters or your image optimizer, or your CDN, because they're normally the places that would address cumulative layout shift. Essentially, what all you're really doing at that point is doubling or tripling up the sort of fix, which isn't necessary. It only needs to be fixed once, and that's what's going to get you the quickest time. I'm not saying it's going to break it or be ridiculously so, but if you're trying to build something that's optimized and efficient, you need to understand what is dealing with which of these so that you don't double it up. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And kind of on that same note, I also have to be careful when you put these fixes in place. So we haven't really talked about fixing them yet, but a lot of times, like, is it Perf Matters that you can hide a lot of the scripts and stuff that aren't being used? And so what I've seen happen several times is people will go through and they'll remove all the scripts that aren't needed on the homepage, which admittedly they shouldn't have been on the homepage because they weren't being used. But they do it to the whole site, by default, and then find out, well, the, contact form plugin isn't working, or some other, opt-ins deeper in the site that you don't look at when you're running the speed tests. Those things have trickle-down effects when you start eliminating scripts and all that stuff. Like, yes, you need to do it, but you also need to be super careful and don't go ripping things out and then not checking every other feature, because a lot of them use the same script libraries or JavaScript libraries and, various resources like that.
Well, and that is a very good point, because your speed test isn't site-wide. Your speed test is URL specific.
Mm-hmm.
So you should really be testing this on a number of pages within your website. If you've built the website, we were just joking before, we were having a bit of a chat before the show, and we were talking about how you in particular were working with somebody that was proposing that they weren't using a template to build like a 96-page website. So you're going to have 96 individual pages rather than maybe half a dozen templates.
And it was the same layout. It would have been perfect for one template. Yeah.
There you go. So if you're, I've lost my train of thought now. So if you're doing this, you should at least be running a speed test on at least one of every template that's in the site. Like, and I realize that you can choose one where the images aren't quite as big as on other pages or this, that, and the other. It's still not a rule of thumb, but as a minimum, that's really what you should be doing, because these tests are page specific, not site wide. So just something else to bear
That's
in
a
mind.
really good suggestion, and honestly, I'm gonna take that and add it to my process, because we'll do that on. We look at it from a slightly different standpoint, and we will test the high priority pages, the ones that we know customers are going to, or they're things like that need to be used. But it makes great sense to also run your template, because that theoretically could be a vastly different framework than your homepage or your other pages. You could have built a layout that has something totally different. So that's a really good tip.
So right, let's get onto a few tips with these. Now, generally speaking, the first contentful paint and the largest contentful paint, generally they're to do with images, I would say. Unless you would disagree, Mr. Patch.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I'm sitting trying to think of like an example off the top of my head, and the slider, like I was talking about, but that's an image or video, same thing. So yeah, it's going to be large graphical elements typically.
Actually, there's a very good point. Video. Let's just touch on that a sec. Right, where do you stand on WordPress hosted videos?
I don't do it.
Good.
Just
I'm
don't.
pleased you said that. We didn't check
I don't
this before.
No.
Before
Okay. Well, now I have a feeling you're going to elaborate on something else. But okay, we very, 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 very rarely will upload a video to the WordPress site. Couple times we have, because it's like literally a 600K video that's just a loop in the background or something, and there's they don't want the whatever shift or flash that might come if YouTube was pulling it up, and these things change all the time, so it's hard to say. But generally speaking, if there is a video that is intended for somebody to watch, I recommend somebody put it on YouTube or Vimeo or a CDN. And I can keep elaborating on some of the whys and stuff like that. But the biggest thing is get it off your site.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I fully agree. And whilst this isn't the WP server show, it is. I think it's key for people to understand that web servers that we use these days are exactly that. They are web servers. They're designed to serve web files quickly and efficiently to the user. And the vast majority of these virtual cloud platforms that we use, whether it's Cloudways or RunCloud or DigitalOcean or whatever it might be, that's what they are. And a lot of devs, a lot of agencies have now grasped the fact that they're web servers. So they're not email servers. So instead you use another service to deliver transactional email like SendGrid or Postmark or Mailgun or whatever it is. And that's been grasped and taken and is absolutely fine. It's kind of the same with video. Crunching video and delivering it efficiently through, over the air through a weakening web connection is a very difficult and server intensive thing to do, particularly if you've got a site that's got hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of concurrent users. And they're the kinds of things that will just eat the resource of web servers and the site will fall over. So by using something like YouTube or Vimeo or Wistia or bunny.net or whatever it is, you can choose where how you want to set the stack up, but just get it off your web server, because your web server isn't designed for that. But when I was a dev working at an agency, so we're talking 14 or 15 years ago, we were building a series of sites for the Charity Commission in the UK, and they wanted to host video on theirs and didn't want to use a service. I mean, we didn't have as many options as we do now, but they didn't want to host it on YouTube, essentially. And so we quoted them an Adobe, I forgot what it was called, an Adobe something server. I've forgotten the name. Anyway, it was going to be $3,000 a month for the server to be powerful enough to do everything it needed to do with the video and keep on serving the website. So it was just, at that point, it was like, yeah, we don't care that much. We will put it on YouTube.
And I imagine that's not even taking into account the traffic and everything you'd be seeing in a few months and where you'd have to go from there.
Yeah. So just anyway. Yeah, so that's.
I kind of had this conversation on a call last week with one of our customers, and they said they had a client who was uploading video, and they were like, explaining it to him, and I said, it's the one thing you see when you go on YouTube, right? You click play, boom, you're watching that video. the quality may not be perfect yet. In 10 seconds, it's going to be HD, but like right off the bat, you're getting the video in an instant format. When you do it on your website, it has to download all that video. It doesn't stream it the same way. YouTube and Vimeo and all these, they've got their own streaming services and stuff like that. And it crunches a video, and it's mind blowing. Like, I'm not a professional video editor, but I've been doing it a long time, and I have a decently powered PC here. It could take hours to render a video in HD, let alone 4K sometimes. And you can upload that to YouTube. First of all, you can upload it faster than you can render it, and then it will render, and they'll optimize it and they'll do all this stuff on there faster than you could ever render it on your computer. And it is absolutely mind blowing. And so I just said, let them do it for us. Like, let them, you know what I mean? They've got this amazing system, and they'll do it. And, potentially, we're not going to talk about it now, but actually a good topic idea for the future is actually using YouTube and everything to kind of benefit your website's SEO. But, there's kind of a trickle down effect too there. So there's benefits to it beyond just improving your website speed, or not hindering it rather.
So assuming that you're not self-hosting video, that would take that asset type out of the largest contentful paint and first contentful paint metric. So what are your sort of tips? What are your best practices on the delivery of images, which is going to affect these two things?
Well, one, obviously you need to optimize them. And again, not to take a lackadaisical approach, but WordPress is doing a much better job with this, with JPEGs these days. They also resized them down to like 2560 or something like that. So it's still very large, but it's usable. In a perfect world, you'd run something like Short Pixel or Smush, or there's all kinds of different image optimization plugins, and these are great because when you've got clients accessing them. Pete's laughing at me for something.
No, I was just thinking about you.
Oh, you that one.
You, yeah. Sorry.
When clients are using them, you can't expect them to optimize their images. You can't expect them to crop them. You can't expect anything. You could try, but trust me, it ain't going to happen 9 times out of 10. So you put these in place, and you can throw anything up there. It doesn't, if your client's taking 10 megabit files or megabyte files off their phone and uploading them, the plugins will take care of that.
So here's the thing I find is that I've found that I'm now, if you've got this stuff set up properly, I'm now telling clients what size their images should be over rather than what size their images should be under.
Yeah,
we can deal with an image that you put in that's too big, but we can't scale it up if it's too small.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
I had this conversation about an hour ago with somebody.
So, right, one last thing before we move off images. Where do you stand on declaring image sizes in your theme?
Where do I stand? This is like, you're making these sound political. Like I'm running for
WordPress.
You left wing
or you right wing? Come on, Jeffrey.
No, we're not going there on this podcast. Well, okay. To answer your question specifically, as specifically as possible, I don't think we typically do that in the theme. I could see how you would. It's just not part of our process now. But what I do is in WP Rocket. That's one of the options, is to have it set. And I know that we would do that all the time, unless it was Divi up until recently, because for some reason it wasn't compatible with Divi for a long time. But I think it is now, and it does. It helps the CLS big time having those in there. And you see it even with the fast connection. You load a website, and even if it only takes a second, boing, 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 things pop up. That's not good. I mean, it doesn't bother me at all, but that's what Google's checking. That's the web core vitals right there. Core web vitals.
Okay.
Look, I'm mixing up the words already.
Okay, yeah. So I see where you're coming from. So I meant declaring image sizes in like functions, so that when you upload it, WordPress makes maybe half a dozen versions of the image.
Exactly. So the various cropped sizes and stuff like that. When it's necessary, yeah. If there's a specific one, a lot of the tools now are soft cropping images through CSS, which is really helpful. So that's like really great, being able to just say, hey, we want all of our featured images, in a 3x2 or 16:9 orientation. And then it doesn't matter. It just displays that in a grid, and it, zooms it in to fit. And that works so much better than trying to stretch them and do all that, or different sizes. Yeah.
No, I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And actually, the benefit of having tools that do work in ratios, of course, helps with your responsive elements, so that
Hmm.
stuff just looks the same regardless of the height or width of the screen, or whether it's one column or two or three or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Like
So
we would set up sites, right? And we'd have 5 or 6 pages and we'd get all the images from the designer or the client, and heroes, you know, they could be any size, but very commonly they're 16 by 9. They're, you know, letter like a widescreen television. That's a very common size. It fits well with screens, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, for like sometimes we wouldn't set that. Those were just the images we were using and they filled the space perfectly and great. And then you hand it off to the client and they would upload a portrait image of, you know, their front desk coordinator on her bio page. And it's like, okay, you got to scroll 4 screen links until you get to the bottom of it. So yeah, it's nice when you can just crop that and then it just crops their nose like this if they use that type of picture. But at least then it's really obvious what's going on.
yeah, I mean, look, you're not gonna. There is a point that you're going to get to where you cannot stress enough to a client to not put a portrait picture in a landscape hole, or vice versa, and stop them from doing it. At the end of the day, they're the squidgy organic human sat in the chair. If they're going to try and chuck the wrong size image in, they're going to try and do it. But you can. There's certain things we can do to try and make it better most of the time.
I actually
Look,
just noticed. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, you can only be as good as the weakest link. And if that weakest link is the squidgy organic human in the chair, well, then, yeah.
You sound like speaking of living in Sheffield, you sound one of Doctor Who's villains right now.
Hey, I hasten to add, some of Doctor Who was filmed less than 10 miles from where I'm
Yep.
sitting right now.
There are many. Every time I was watching, I just caught up on all of that. There were many references to Sheffield. That's
Yeah.
right. One of the girls goes, "I'm from Sheffield, mate," and it's like, I don't know what that means, but okay, cool. She's from Sheffield, mate. Come on, man. What are you thinking? Like,
That means she's local. What are you talking about? And another claim to fame: the quarry scenes in the latest Mission Impossible film were filmed also in the Peak District, which is it's a bit further away from where Doctor Who was filmed, about 12, 13, maybe 14 miles from here. And it was at the end of the garden of somebody I went to university with. In fact, during one of their filming breaks, their kids were looking over their garden fence into this field that goes out towards the quarry. Tom Cruise's helicopter landed. He came over and said hello. Check that out.
that's pretty cool.
See, I'm just dropping the names all over the place in this episode.
We're not
Okay.
worthy. We're not worthy. Okay, before we move on to that, the image, we're still talking about the image size real fast, but I saw something. We were talking about, you know, client kind of being the weakest link. They're going to upload what they're going to upload. I noticed this last night, and it's probably been there for years, so feel free to laugh at me, guys. But in ACF, in the image field, when you set one up into your template or whatever, you can put restrictions on the type of or the size of images you upload. So you could put, you know, must be 500 pixels wide. And I mean, I've done that actually, you've probably seen on SEO Hive. I've done that like in little notes on some of our custom fields. It's like, hey, we recommend you use this size, but you can actually make that a requirement. So if they upload something that's only 500 pixels wide, you know, it'll air out and say, sorry, you need to do, you know, wider or whatever the specifics are. But I thought that was pretty cool. And yet another way to try to make it as foolproof as possible.
Absolutely. It's a shame they can't say, like, must be a minimum of 500 pixels wide and must be wider than it is tall.
Well, you
That
might,
would.
you might be. I imagine you could probably set that up. I didn't spend enough time looking at it, but I think there's probably
Okay.
something.
Okay.
I mean, you could figure out whatever the minimum for 500 pixels wide would be, and that would be your minimum for the vertical.
For the height, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
I suppose. Right. So I feel like we've done a bit of a kind of, it's been a bit scattergun, but a bit of a sort of media, image, video-y type section now. So let's because there is more to this than just images and videos.
Well, it's simple. You put all the JavaScript at the top of your page, and you're done.
Yeah, put it all at the top of the page. Right. Do you want to go through your thing about deferring JavaScript?
We generally will flat out just defer the JavaScript. Usually works fine. But then, of course, we have to go back and check because you never know. You never know. Deferring it is usually fine. Delaying it has a lot of problems quite often. And I've seen the biggest one on mobile. Have you ever seen, you know how some sites will have a like a loading icon or something like that?
Yeah.
So I've seen
Well,
those.
that was the old school way of getting around this.
Yeah, I don't know why people use it, but I still see it a lot. And I have worked on sites a lot with it. It loads and it just keeps loading and loading and loading and loading and loading. And we get these emails and we go and check and it loads fine. And we realize if you hit enter and then you don't touch your phone, it never sees input and it never tells the website to load the JavaScript. On a computer, it's not that big of a deal because you're moving your mouse around and that triggers it. But on the phone, sometimes you'll hit enter and you will not touch your phone and it just sits there. And so that's just, I'm sorry, it's more of a cautionary tale, I suppose, and a tip to improve your speeds. But
No, tell me about it. I've had, just like you've had some discussions with clients about some of this stuff already. I'm currently in a email table tennis exchange with a client of ours who we've built this like interactive slider. So there's an SVG on one side of the page with touch zones or hot zones over the top of it, and depending on where you hover, where you click on the mouse, click on the image, it changes the slider to a specific slide of text. I hasten to add, no images, of text right next to it, and it changes the background color and whatever to tie it with the section that you clicked on. So it's like a pie chart thing with more information, essentially. They have asked now 4 times whether we could do something else on hover, and I've had to say no because you can't hover on a touch device. And it's like, how many times? They've replied. I haven't. It's the ball is now in my court. I now need to reply to them. They've emailed again asking the same thing, and I feel like asking them to, in my reply, going back to them and saying, please hover your finger over your iPhone and tell me what you click on. Tell me what happens without touching it. Just get your phone and just hover your finger. Does anything happen? No, because you need to touch it. That is click. There is no hover state on mobile. Anyhow,
I love when people have come up with ideas, and I do. I mean, like, I genuinely love it. But then, as like somebody who has to then try to put it into action, you have to go like, okay, dear Joe the plumber, love you, bro, but you're not a web engineer. You're not coming up with ideas better than anybody else, right? Like that sounds like a good idea, but there's a reason it doesn't exist. I promise you.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, yes, that you're dead right. The whole JavaScript thing, deferring it is generally okay, but please go and do your own checks. So ideally, you want your total blocking time to be less than 150 milliseconds, which isn't long when you think that includes your time to first byte and then loading the scripts. So your blocking time needs to be quite limited, in which case deferring the JavaScript is a good way to reduce that within the page load.
It's a little bit of a segue here, Pete, but it's funny that a couple years ago I saw, when looking at reports and trying to action these things and trying to improve scores, the biggest factor that we could do would be fixing the images, just optimizing them, making them not, be 10 megabytes of a web page load. And I'm seeing this less and less now. It's still getting scores in the 97, 98, passing all these core web vital tests. But then, like, a little warning that the page load is still pretty big. Like, we've got one client that just they lots of images and a lot of transparent pings for their design, so they're just inherently massive. And their whole front page is like 9 megabytes. And to me, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm like, no, like, it should not be that big. It drives me nuts. But it's passing like with flying colors. And I'm just like, okay, so I guess Google's finally accepting that everybody's got broadband now and it doesn't make as much of a deal. But 2 years ago, if your website was 3 megabytes, boom, it was failing. Like it was just not going to load. Or I'm sorry, it wasn't not going to load, but it's definitely going to be penalized.
Yeah.
And now less and less. I'm not saying ignore image sizes by any means, but it's kind of like I was earlier going, yeah, we kind of let WordPress do their thing, and then we don't use a bunch of like overblown PNGs. That usually is more than sufficient. And I'm kind of interested. I'm very surprised to see that the data seems to be agreeing with that rather, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings us on to really the last two that we've got left, isn't it? Which is speed index and time to interactive. So the speed index, as I said earlier, so this is kind of like how long it takes for the HTML and text assets to load. So none of the media, the additional media stuff on top of that. But within that load, you have your initial JavaScript load, the time blocking stuff that we've been talking about, and you have your style sheets. So whilst you're always going to get the biggest bang for your buck by optimizing your media hugely, because nothing in code unless you've got a really badly coded website, or I suppose exceptionally tiny images. They're always going to have the biggest impact. But when it comes on to things like speed index, i.e. stuff that doesn't include media, this is where things like minification come in, which is essentially removing all of the spaces out of your style sheets and JavaScript documents. You do have to be quite, generally speaking, I would say style sheets are safe to do. We normally minified those straight away. HTML is normally safe to do. Please test anything that you're minifying just to make sure it hasn't broken anything. Don't say, oh, well, Pete said it'd work, so it must be all right. You've got to test it. But generally speaking, those two are okay. Minifying JavaScript, though, can cause some issues, and that is really something to be careful about. Largely, it depends where the JavaScript's coming from. If you've coded all the JavaScript yourself and you understand it, you're normally quite safe to. If you've pre-compiled the JavaScript, so you're using something like Gulp to compile it through the dev process, then it'll absolutely be fine because you wouldn't have launched it if it wasn't. But if you're pulling in lots of JavaScript from lots of different plugins and they could be injecting the code onto the site in different ways, that's when you can get into a bit of hot water. So again, if you've got a general tech stack, you can play with this stuff and get a reasonable understanding of what's going to work for you and what's not. If, on the other hand, you're relying very heavily on plugins, then it might be worth just either refraining from it or just running the test without it or running it with it and see what's breaking. But yeah, that's generally where I see you're going to get more of the issues.
Agreed. And I kind of don't want to say anything else about it.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
No. I'm kidding, but I don't want to be judged for saying this, but I normally don't bother with those. And it's just because it has introduced so many problems. And everything you said is spot on, especially like CSS is usually fine, HTML is usually fine. JavaScript is where it gets sketchy. But it just, the reality of, I guess, our arrangement with clients and agencies is we're managing hundreds of websites. And so if we go, hardcore and put all those in, and then the client goes and adds a plugin, we've created another support ticket for us. And it didn't really make a big enough difference to justify it. So, you know what I mean? It was just like, all right, we gotta try a little more carefully with the way that works. In theory, yeah, it should be minimized. I think best practice, like you mentioned, like with Gulp, right? If everything is compiled specifically for that, then perfect.
Yeah. I mean, look, we're getting back to a point. I was going to ask you about how you've experienced doing this on a larger scale, but I'm aware we're 42 minutes into this episode, so maybe that's a separate topic for a separate day. But we are verging round the topic here that SEO is really a displacement exercise. So if you are struggling to optimize some of this stuff and just the report for your site is, it's not bad, but it's not brilliant, there's room for improvement, and you're struggling to get it any higher, there's absolutely nothing stopping you going and crawling or scanning the first 2 or 3 websites in the SERPs and seeing what their results are. Mm-hmm. Because if they're only scoring a grade C or D and you've got yours to a B, well, hey, that's great. That's job done. It doesn't matter if you get to an A. You're already in front of them for this metric. I'm not saying that just Core Web Vitals will make you rank above them. But this whole SEO piece it's a displacement game. In order for you to rank in top in place 1, everybody else needs to shift down 1, and because you have displaced them. So you just need to be better than the competition. You don't necessarily need to be A star 100% all of the time. And I think that's a key. You've got to understand the context of the fight that you're in. I think that's really what I'm trying to say with that.
Yeah. What's that cliche, like, aim for the stars and hit the moon or something? I don't know. I'm probably butchering that, but What is it? Help me out. I feel so stupid right now. What is it?
I don't know.
Come on, that's the thing. Don't make me Google it.
Some weird Californian thing where you're smacking the moon. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think I made the moon. Man, you can make me want to Google it right now. I don't want to do it in the middle of the podcast though. But oh god, I feel stupid. Somebody write in the comments what I'm trying to say here.
We're not live. Nobody's going to write in the comments. The only person in the comments is me.
Well, I'll see it later. I still want to. I'm not going to figure it out by then. I'll forget by then.
Okay.
I'll forget by the time we finish recording this. But somebody will respond and correct me, and I'll be like, "Thanks." Reach for the stars, and you'll land on this. I don't know. Land on the sun. That would be death. Whatever. Anyway, you should try. But like you said, yeah, it's a displacement thing. I like to refer to it as a tiebreaker.
Yeah. That's another good analogy. Yeah, that's another good way of looking at it.
So don't lose sleep. It's important. Yes, you should work on it. Yes, you should apply these principles. Yes. Don't lose sleep over it.
Not generally. Not unless your competitors have aced these things and they are important. Therefore, you need to. Yeah, but
I can't tell you how. And I'm saying this as an SEO guy now, but like I can't tell you how many times I've gotten emails from SEO freelancers for clients, and they're going, "Well, hey, it's we need to get the CLS to 99." It's like it's at 98. It's fine. Like it's fine. But how much time can we apply to this? What's the budget? And like, oh no, you should just have it done. Well, okay.
Well, look, I think that brings us to a bit of a wrap on this. I hope you found it useful. I think the only other thing that we need to say, we need to say two things. Firstly, we want to thank our listeners who have joined us so far on this journey. We've now done 15 episodes. This is episode number 15, and we've had a bit of a blast. We do have some other kind of ideas that we want to go with the show, but we wanted to get a sort of bedrock of episodes in that were just me and Jeff, just getting some banter going, talking about some of the big issues, some of the things that we think would add most value to agencies. And it's been a blast for the last 15 episodes. So we're going to be keeping on. This isn't goodbye. This is we're going to be around in the new year, but we are going to take a break for a couple of weeks over Christmas and New Year. And so we want to say thank you to everybody that's listened, that sent us messages of support, that subscribed, that's commented on things and joined us, shared on social media, all that kind of stuff. It really does. Mm-hmm. It genuinely from. Well, I'm speaking for myself. I was going to say from both of us, but it really does mean a lot. We're not a huge show. We don't have massive following. So every time it pings and somebody has shared something or commented or liked or subscribed, it really does give us the feels. So thank you for that. And the second thing is to say that we will be back in January with some more shows, but we do want to wish everybody an exceptionally happy Christmas and New Year, or holidays, whatever you believe in, and whatever this period of the year is. Make sure you get some downtime, make sure you get some rest, get some recharging going, and we will be with you in the new year.
Amen. Pete said it. That's great. We thank you guys so much, and we are very much looking forward to the holidays and picking things back up in the new year.
Have a good one, everybody. We should have done this in Christmas jump. No, actually, that would have dated the episode. Thinking about, although now we've just dated the episode by wishing everybody happy Christmas. So
that's true.
Maybe this should have been orange and grey Christmas jumpers. I don't know if
I have a couple really good ugly holiday sweaters. Only one's offensive.
Yeah, let's. Then I definitely would have to censor this for adults. Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you soon. SEO Stack. We'll see you then.
The WP SEO Show is brought to you by SEO Hive, your agency's proactive white label SEO partner. We understand that finding a reliable SEO supplier is key to ensuring you build stable monthly recurring revenue into your digital agency. At SEO Hive, we have a suite of products that will help you sell, scale and deliver your monthly SEO retainers, from our Scout reports and one-off technical boosters, to our flagship local SEO and honeypot plans, all of which have clear pricing and monthly deliverables. If you want to explore how SEO Hive can help your agency deliver high-quality and reliable SEO agreements for your clients, you can find more information at seohive.co and schedule a call to discuss the next steps.